Andreas Athanasiou, aka Grease Lightning, is coming back to Chicago after signing a 2-year deal with the Blackhawks. I'll break down why this was a win-win for both sides, and I'll also get into Colin Blackwell's season recap segment. All that and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? Welcome on in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today is Friday, June 9th. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me out on Twitter at Jack Bushman2, or you could also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And real quick, just a reminder that you could subscribe or follow along to the show for free on YouTube and wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Make sure to go and do that real quick, folks. I would greatly appreciate it. It only takes 2 seconds, and that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it's available each and every day. I also wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Make sure to go and download the Game Time app right now to get the cheapest tickets for all the sports, music, and theater events near you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. As always, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your day. First, just wanted to say I apologize for not getting an episode out yesterday. I've been having some audio issues, actually, with a new microphone that I just purchased. I honestly don't even know if it's going well right now because the only way I figured it out is when I go back and listen to the recording of the episode and find out my audio has been a little bit scratchy. So hopefully that's not happening right this second and I'm not wasting my time once again. It's been a little bit of a hassle for me these last few days. I had to buy a new adapter. That was still giving me some trouble. So I'm hoping that I sound a-okay to all you Blackhawks fans out there right now. And again, I apologize for not getting an episode out yesterday, but on the bright side, I do have a 2-parter episode coming out, and I believe part 1 is going to be coming out on Saturday morning, a 2-part conversation with Joe Brand from WGN as we discussed all things Chicago Blackhawks here at this point in the offseason. So that's my little present to make up for not having an episode yesterday. Make sure to be on the lookout for that conversation with Joe Brand in the coming days. But enough of that. To kick things off on the show here today for segment 1, I figured I have to talk and dive right into the big news regarding the Chicago Blackhawks that dropped on Wednesday night, which was that pending unrestricted free agent forward Andreas Athanasiou is coming back, baby. Grease Lightning is coming back to Chicago. Athanasiou officially signed a 2-year, $8.5 million deal with the Chicago Blackhawks. That's a $4.25 million AAV through the 2024-2025 season. And this was a win for both sides. Make no mistake about it. And I did see a lot of interesting comments on Twitter suggesting that Andreas Athanasiou was getting heavily overpaid here. But I think all of us Blackhawks fans understood, yeah, that's kind of the point here. The Blackhawks have $40 million in cap space, as I've talked about on the show numerous amount of times the last couple of weeks. They're not going to be spending all of that this offseason. Kyle Davidson is not going to be rushing into anything. He's going to maintain that patient approach that's led to the Blackhawks being in the position they're in right now. They're not going to go on a spending spree. He's not going to go blowing all his cash. No, the Blackhawks, in fact, aren't expected to do very much this offseason, which I'll get into here in just a second, but they still do need to reach that salary cap floor for the first time in literally forever. The Blackhawks are worrying about the salary cap floor and not the ceiling. It's interesting how the tides have turned. So giving Andreas Athanasiou $4.25 million over the next 2 years, is it an overpay? Yeah, but he was probably deserving of it after playing in 81 of the 82 games for the Blackhawks this season, being a consistent force of the lineup. Maybe he didn't have, the best season, but he certainly ended on a really high note, reached 20 goals for, I believe, just the second time in his career and the first time since he was a member of the Detroit Red Wings. he ended the year on a really high note. He also established some chemistry with Lukas Reichel. And look, the Blackhawks, as I said, they can afford to give Andreas Athanasiou and more guys like that who are in similar situations. This is why we saw Jared Tenorti prior to the end of the season get $1.25 million through the end of next season. Jared Tenorti is a seventh defenseman at best on a very good team. But you know what? He grinded throughout this season, did whatever he could to get on the ice. Didn't matter if he had a broken jaw, hurt hip, hurt back. Jared Tenorti, if he was even somewhat capable of playing, he was in the Blackhawks lineup. And for that, he gets a nice raise because the Blackhawks can afford to do that. Same exact thing with Andreas Athanasiou. Is it an overpay? Yeah, but it's not going to affect the Blackhawks whatsoever because that's the amount of cap space they have. And it gives Athanasiou a little bit of a reward for coming back to the Blackhawks for these next 2 years. So I think it's undoubtedly a win-win deal for both sides. Most Blackhawks fans out there recognize that right from the get-go. And I also think Athanasiou fits into what Kyle Davidson is trying to build here with the Blackhawks. Now, I don't think Athanasiou is a long-term fit necessarily, but let's look at the picture for next season. The Blackhawks are obviously going to be bringing in Connor Bedard. He's likely to be getting a top 6 role right out of the gate, I would imagine. Lukas Reichel, I mean, I would be utterly confused if he wasn't a full-time NHLer next season after what we saw from him in his final stint of the year. It just feels like it's time for him to make that leap. So those are two fast players, and I think bringing back Andreas Athanasiou, a guy who obviously can skate with the best of them in this league and play a high-paced game, I think it makes sense to bring him back and to give Bedard an actual weapon that he could play with and plays a similar style. So it makes sense for a multitude of different ways here, Blackhawks fans. Andreas Athanasiou, though, I'm excited to have him come back. He is a fun player to watch, always capable of pulling a highlight reel goal out of his bag whenever, you seem to expect it the least. He'll go on and score one of the nastiest goals you'll see all season long. He makes watching bad Blackhawks teams a little bit easier because of the speed that he provides. So I'm excited to have Andreas Athanasiou back, but I figured with AA coming back, I mentioned a moment ago, I don't really expect the Blackhawks to make all that many more moves in free agency because there's just not a whole lot of open spots on their roster. And that's what I kind of wanted to talk to you all about. I wanted to go through a little bit of an early outlook as to what we could see for the Blackhawks forward group next season. And again, we're in June. The season doesn't start till October. It's obviously way too early, but just to give a little bit of a perspective as to what the Blackhawks have right now and what it could look like come this fall. So as I mentioned, Connor Bedard obviously going to be coming to Chicago here in just 19 days' time. Couldn't be any more excited about that. I would imagine a good top line for this Blackhawks. Again, maybe this isn't what they roll with, but I'm just putting hypotheticals out there. Lukas Reichel, Connor Bedard, Andreas Athanasiou as a top line. Is it a good top line on a good team? No, and the Blackhawks don't really care about being good next year. So I think that's still a top line, though, that can help Connor Bedard and Lukas Reichel develop and can provide this Blackhawks team with a little bit of insight on what they're trying to do moving forward with the pace of that group. Then as the second line, Tyler Johnson, Taylor Radish, Philip Kurashev. Obviously, Johnson or Kurashev would probably be the center in that circumstance, but that looks like it could be a potential second line for next year. Third line, I have Colin Blackwell, Cole Gutman, and potentially Joey Anderson, who's a restricted free agent, but considering what he did at the end of the year, I don't see the Blackhawks not bringing him back. And then we also have Boris Kachuk, Reese Johnson, and Mackenzie Entwistle. Out of that entire group, out of those 12, only Philip Kurashev and Joey Anderson are restricted free agents. So, and both of those two, I think, are very likely to be coming back. So there's just not a whole lot of open forward spots here for the Chicago Blackhawks. Like I said, maybe one or two additions at the very most to this forward group. But they also have Anders Bjork and Austin Wagner to make decisions upon come free agency on July 1st. I would assume one of those two is coming back. I think they're both intriguing options. Anders Bjork, I'd probably lean towards a little bit more. And then coming up, there's also, I think Jalen Lipin and Ryder Rolston are going to be in Rockford for the majority of next season, but those are two names to keep an eye on. Michael Tepley is someone perhaps who could be getting an NHL shot. There's still Mike Hardman, David Gust, Luke Philp, and Brett Sini down in Rockford as well. So like I said, there's just not a whole lot of openings for this Blackhawks forward group. And not only the patient approach for Kyle Davidson, but just a numbers game. I don't really know if they have a whole lot of spots to add. So there's just a little bit of some inside information or a look ahead at what we could see the Blackhawks forward group potentially be come the fall later on this year. But I am excited about the signing of Andreas Athanasiou. As I mentioned, I think it makes sense for a handful of different reasons, and I would be really excited to see him potentially on the top line with Lucas Reichel and good old Connor Bedard come September and October. All right, coming up in just a moment here, Hawks fans, I will also be talking about an interesting situation involving the Blackhawks earlier this week, and they were reportedly considering taking a look at goaltender Cal Petersen from the Los Angeles Kings before he got traded. But first, I want to talk to you all about Game Time, which is the perfect place for last-minute ticket deals. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful, and Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy your tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And I personally have used Game Time since well before they were an ad here on the show, going back to like when I was in high school. I'd use Game Time to go to Blackhawks games with my friends. When I went to the University of Missouri, I'd use Game Time to go to St. Louis Cardinals games from time to time. Saw the Cubbies and the Cardinals duke it out a few times at Busch Stadium. Thanks to Game Time, I've been using it for a long, long time. I highly recommend it, and I always love how they give me images of my seats, and they provide event cancellation protection. So be sure to go and download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, all you have to do is create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Game Time. All right, we're back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. Real quick, just want to tell you all a little bit about the good stuff I have planned for Locked On Blackhawks here in the next couple of weeks. As I mentioned during the intro, I recently had a conversation with WGN's Joe Brand. It's probably going to be a two-parter episode, maybe part one. Could even drop tomorrow morning. Make sure to keep an eye out for that. I'm also going to be having, hopefully, a special member of the Regina Pats staff, I'm hoping, here prior to the NHL draft. I'm also going to continue looking at 2023 NHL draft profiles here on the show. I've already gone over a handful of them: Ryan Leonard, Gabe Perreault, Matthew Wood, Gavin Brindley. Make sure to go and check those out on my YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. I'm getting into my last two Blackhawks season recap segments, and once those wrap up, I'm going to be getting into my summer top 10 prospects list. So plenty of good stuff coming up here in these next couple of weeks. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube to stay up to date on all of that. All right, segment 2, real quick here, though. I'm getting raspy. I need a sip or two of agua. Apologies for that. I've talked a lot today. I actually recorded my conversation with Joe Brand earlier this afternoon, and that was like a 50 minute talk. So as a result of that and doing this show here today, plus shows all week, my golf shows, the voice is a little bit raspy, so I apologize. You're just going to have to bear with me through it. But for segment 2, I did want to talk for a few moments as well today about an intriguing rumor surrounding the Chicago Blackhawks from just a couple of days ago. And for those of you who may have missed it, there was kind of a big three-way deal made in the NHL that involved the Los Angeles Kings, the Philadelphia Flyers, and the Columbus Blue Jackets, which most notably sent defenseman Ivan Provorov, who actually scored the game-winning goal in the last game of the regular season against the Blackhawks in overtime. Seemed like, us Blackhawks fans were upset that the Hawks squeaked out a point in that one, but turns out losing in overtime was exactly what they needed to land Connor Bedard, and we can thank none other than Mr. Ivan Provorov, his last goal as a member of the Philadelphia Flyers anyway, but he was kind of the headliner of that three-way trade. He got sent from the Philadelphia Flyers to the Columbus Blue Jackets, who have just been, I don't know what they're trying to do, but good for them. They're at least being interesting, and that's more than we can say about Columbus most of the time. But also involved in that deal, of course, the Los Angeles Kings sent Sean Walker and goalie Cal Petersen to the Philadelphia Flyers, while the Kings received a couple of minor leaguers and defenseman Kevin Connaughton. But where the Blackhawks come into this, folks, some of you may be asking, is according to Elliot Friedman, prior to that trade, the Blackhawks, I don't know why I said it like that, playoffs, the Blackhawks reportedly had some interest in goaltender Cal Petersen before he ended up getting traded to the Philadelphia Flyers. And the reason I bring this up on the show is it's a clear-cut example of general manager Kyle Davidson trying to take on some bad contracts in order to, A, get assets for them in return, because that's what he's done since becoming GM of the Chicago Blackhawks, and B, it also helps this team get to the salary cap floor, which I just talked about, obviously, with Andreas Athanasiou getting a little bit of a pay raise, which, again, no one should be mad about. That was done intentionally. And that's why the Blackhawks were interested in Cal Petersen. It wasn't because he's been a good goalie for the last couple of years. It's actually not the case whatsoever. He probably has one of the worst contracts in the entire NHL. And he actually didn't even play in an NHL game this past year. I believe he spent the entire season with the Ontario Reign of the OHL. So the only reason the Blackhawks wanted him is simply because of his salary. And they also would have likely been able to recoup something nice from Philadelphia in order for doing them a favor. So it obviously just goes to show what the Blackhawks are trying to do right now and what type of deals they're trying to make. It's not they're going out in free agency, spending a lot of money. I just broke down why that's not going to happen this summer. A, they don't want to spend that money. B, there's just not a whole lot of room. And C, they don't want themselves tied up in anything long-term. They just want to reach the salary cap floor, hence why the deal for Athanasiou was only 2 years. And for those of you out there who may not know, goaltender Cal Petersen, I referenced one of the worst contracts in the NHL. He's got a $5 million AAV through the next 2 years. Yikes. Not a good contract. Obviously, the Los Angeles Kings were trying to shed that. They did so and were able to re-sign defenseman Vladislav Gavrikov as a result. But it just goes to show, again, like I said, the type of deals that the Blackhawks are interested in right now. It's taking on bad contracts like we saw a lot of last summer and at the deadline and stuff like that. It's Kyle Davidson sticking to his plan. So don't be surprised, even though the Blackhawks didn't wind up getting Cal Petersen, don't be surprised whatsoever if those are the types of moves we see them make. I've referenced multiple times Brock Besser from the Vancouver Canucks. Connor Garland, I think, could be in that same boat. Same with Anthony Beauvillier. I think one other player to keep an eye out for maybe is Andrew Mangiapane from the Calgary Flames. Or I've even brought up Anthony Mantha from the Washington Capitals. Those types of guys who are clearly getting overpaid, teams that don't have a lot of money and need to shed some of that, the Blackhawks will be willing recipients to take that on. But this also kind of made me realize something else, Blackhawks fans as well, is that going into next season, I really do believe that maybe not the Blackhawks, but the Rockford IceHogs are going to add another depth goaltender to their roster. And this kind of became a realization to me because when I first saw this news of Cal Petersen or the Blackhawks being interested in Petersen prior to getting traded, I thought, that's interesting. They already have Mrazek and Soderblom under contract. And I understood that bringing in Cal Petersen wasn't going to be an NHLer, but I just thought it was an interesting addition. Where exactly would they fit him in? Because they have their duo in the NHL and they also have their duo in the AHL. But it also just kind of served as a reminder to me that Drew Commesso and Jackson Stauber, the projected 1 and 2, whatever order, we're not sure yet. They're the projected duo for the Rockford IceHogs next year. And the oldest of those two is 24, 25 years old. I don't exactly know how old Stauber is off the top of my head, but I don't think he can be 25. You know what? It's just going to drive me crazy. I have Cap Friendly. I'm just going to go look it up right now. I want to know how old Jackson Stauber is off the top of my head. Jackson Stauber is 24 years old. There you go. He's the oldest of the two, obviously. And with that being the case, I just think I'm sure Rockford would like to have a little bit of experience down there to help those two kind of go through the development, with it being Comesso's first year at the pro level and only Stauber's second. So it was just another realization that I really do think there's probably going to be another goaltender added somewhere here in the offseason for the Blackhawks. And they're probably also going to be taking a goaltender, I would imagine, somewhere in the 2023 NHL draft as well. All right, coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, don't go anywhere because I still have to get into forward Colin Blackwell's 2022-2023 season recap segment. But first, I need to talk to you all about bird dogs. And if you're looking for fit, comfort, and versatility, then look no further than bird dogs. And I personally love their stretchy fabric that makes me extra comfortable in their shorts and pants. And it gives me the freedom I need to wear them wherever, whether it's on the golf course, to a work meeting, or even just when I want to hang out with friends. I can wear bird dogs wherever I want to go. And for me personally, I always hate dressing up formal. I hate wearing all that stuff. But whenever I wear bird dogs, I can look presentable regardless of the setting. And I'm also extremely comfortable wherever I go. So make sure to go and check out birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL. And when you enter the promo code LockedOnNHL, they'll throw in a custom free Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. Again, just use the promo code LockedOnNHL to get a free tumbler with every single order. Bird Dogs, the comfiest shorts and pants in the game. All right, before I wrap up today's show, I still need to get into my next season recap segment. As a reminder, I only have a couple of more of these. I've broken down basically all of the Blackhawks roster at this point in time. If you want to go check out a player in particular, or you want to get all caught up on this segment, you can easily do so by going and checking out my YouTube channel. I have a playlist dedicated to 2022-2023 season recaps. Go and check it out there. And in every episode, I have everything time-coded in the description too, so you can easily jump to which part of the episode you want to get to. And while you're there, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It does me a huge favor, and I would greatly appreciate all of your support. All right, but one of my final players, one of my final season recaps that I still have to get into, I believe after today, there will only be two more. Quick bonus to who can ever go down in the comment section below right now and name the two players that I haven't gone over thus far. And here's the hint. You have to have played in at least a quarter of the games for the Blackhawks this season. I believe there's only two guys who I haven't gone over yet. Go and name them down in the comment section below. Who I'm going to be getting into today, though, is none other than forward Colin Blackwell, who signed on with the Blackhawks in free agency last summer. He yanked a 2-year, $2.4 million contract with a $1.2 million AAV after he had a really solid season with the Seattle Kraken. He was then traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs at the deadline, where he finished up the campaign. But I thought, whenever I saw Colin Blackwell these last couple of seasons, I honestly was really impressed with his game. He spent some time in Nashville, and then when he was with Seattle in 2021, 2022, when the Blackhawks faced the Kraken, maybe it was just me, I don't know if anyone feels similarly, but Colin Blackwell was one of the guys who stood out to me because he wasn't someone who was in an offensive-minded role. No, he was playing in the bottom six, but he was tenacious. He was in on the forecheck. He had some good speed, and he also provided some good goal-scoring touch from a guy who plays down on the third or fourth line. So kind of my expectation going into this year, and that's why I really like the signing, because my expectation for Colin Blackwell was that he was going to provide a much-needed, maybe not a huge uplift. It's not like I expected Colin Blackwell to be a 20-goal scorer or anything, but I did think he would provide a nice little uplift to the bottom six offensively, because when you go and look at the Blackhawks a couple of years prior, they just didn't get enough contributions from those bottom two forward lines. It had been Patrick Kane, Alex DeBrincat, and Dylan Strome doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And I was really excited for Blackwell to come in because I really liked what I saw from him when he was in Seattle, with that energy and the forechecking and just the offensive ability from someone who didn't necessarily have to be in an offensive-minded role. And to add that, along with a very team-friendly contract, only $1.2 million for 2 years, it would also make him very movable if the Blackhawks wanted to go that route, which, rewind back to prior to free agency last year, that's all we thought the Blackhawks were going to do, right, was bring on contracts that they could easily flip at the deadline. Max Domi, Andreas Athanasiou signing matching deals. Colin Blackwell, I thought, even though he did ink a 2-year deal, was in a very, very similar boat because of that $1.2 million contract. So he'd be easy to trade for many different reasons. I thought it was a win-win for both sides. But then in the first half of the season, Colin Blackwell was an absolute ghost out there. Really struggled to make an impact whatsoever. There were so many nights in the first half of the season where I just didn't notice him, and he was just a filler. And for a bad team, you just really couldn't notice him all that much. And while he did pick it up at the end of the year prior to suffering a season-ending injury, make no mistake about it, the numbers altogether for the season were still underwhelming. But hopefully he'll be able to have a little bit of a bounce back season, and maybe the Hawks can flip him for a middle round pick or something at this year's deadline, because at 30 years old, it's what Colin Blackwell is. It's unlikely that he's going to be part of the future, part of the rebuild here in Chicago. While you still do need to have some veterans, I feel like he's going to have to prove an awful lot to the front office this year for that to happen. So getting into Blackwell's numbers for the 2022-2023 season, he wound up playing in 53 games for the Blackhawks. It's actually the second most of his career, 5 less than what he had accrued the year prior. Offensively, only 2 goals in those 53 games, though, for Colin Blackwell, which is undoubtedly a down year for him, considering he had 10 goals in 58 games the year before for the Kraken and the Maple Leafs combined. He also only had 8 assists, which he had 10 the year before, which totaled 10 points. And that's the lowest that he actually has tallied since when he had 27 points in, I believe, 2018-19 for the Nashville Predators, back when he was like a rookie or a second-year player. He tallied 10 points in 27 games with the Predators. So, yeah, not really a great offensive output for Colin Blackwell this season, to put it nicely. To say one nice thing about him, though, he only tallied 6 penalty minutes in his 53 games for the Hawks this season. So he did a good job of staying out of the box. But at the same time, for a guy who's in the bottom 6, I know I did give him a lot of credit for what he's done offensively in his career, but to only have 6 penalty minutes for a guy who plays a bottom 6 defensive-minded role, maybe that tells you he needs to be a little bit grittier. There's a tough in-between whenever you kind of take a look at penalty minutes, right? You don't want a guy to have too many, because then you're like, oh, he needs to stay out of the box. But if he's a guy who's supposed to play with an edge and doesn't really get penalty minutes, you're like, whoa, maybe he needs to play a little scrappier. It's tough to kind of break down all in all. Maybe I should just throw penalty minutes out of these season recap segments. Maybe that's the better idea. In terms of shooting percentage, Colin Blackwell only shot 3.8% this year, which is, well, by far a season low. I mean, or a career low. He's only shot under 10% one time in his NHL career, and that's when he shot 9.7% as a rookie. So maybe a little bit of puck luck led to Colin Blackwell not finding the back of the net and not totaling as many points this season, but one thing I did notice was that he only had 53 shots. Yeah, 53 shots in his 53 games played this year. Compared to the year prior, he had 77 shots in his 58 games. So was also not rifling the puck on net or hitting the net as frequently as he had in years prior either. In terms of his time on ice, he averaged 11 minutes and 48 seconds, pretty on par with what he's been his entire career for the most part, a third, fourth line guy. Face-off percentage, he won 50% of his face-offs, but he did only take 36 draws total on the year, which is by far a career low. And kind of looking at his trajectory at the face-off dot, it's been getting lower and lower and lower every year. So kind of the recognition that Colin Blackwell might be more of a winger than a center iceman at this point of his career, but is still capable of going in there and winning a draw when he needs to. I was disappointed with Blackwell this year. He only had 49 hits in his 53 games. He had 91 the year prior, so his number was nearly cut in half. I don't know if that's because he wasn't as engaged with the Blackhawks because they were downright awful, but that probably goes hand in hand with why his penalty minutes were so low. He wasn't throwing his weight around out there as much. He did have a career-high 20 takeaways, so I'll give him a little bit credit on the defensive side of things there. He did play more of a defensive role than he really ever has in his career as well. He had a 71.1 defensive zone start percentage. So was playing defensive-minded situations a lot this year. Could also be part of why his offensive numbers took a little bit of a dip. In terms of the analytics, pretty poor for Colin Blackwell, 39.9%, actually one of the worst that I've looked at for the Hawks this season. He was on the ice for 15 goals for to 36 against. And also, he had an 89.7 on ice save percentage, which, yeah, that's bad, but for most of the Blackhawks players that I've broken down, Jonathan Toews was like 86.1. So for Colin Blackwell to be 89.7, that's actually better than most of the Blackhawks players. Still had really poor analytics in a couple of different regards. So one last thing before I get into the grades, I did want to get into a breakdown of Blackwell's season real quick to discuss how much of a struggle it was for him in the first half. The first 32 games of the season, Colin Blackwell didn't score a goal. It took him till the 33rd game of the year to net his first goal with the Chicago Blackhawks. And in those first 32 games, he only tallied 3 assists as well. So 3 points in the first 32 games of the year. Not very good for Mr. Colin Blackwell. Then he did start to pick things up once the calendar shifted into 2023. He tallied 6 points in 12 games, 2 goals, and 4 assists from January 8th to February 10th. So found his stride a little bit there, but only had 1 point in his final 9 games before suffering a season-ending injury. So just not enough consistency out of Colin Blackwell this season. Not enough physicality. The shooting percentage was down. There just wasn't a lot to like out of Colin Blackwell's game in his first year with the Blackhawks. And like I said, considering the expectation, which is usually what I try to put in my mind here when I give a player a grade, I was excited about Blackwell coming to the bottom 6 to provide a little bit of offense, and he just really didn't do that for the entire season other than January 8th to February 10th. So taking everything into consideration, I'm going to give Colin Blackwell a D+ for his performance this season. One of the worst grades I've dished out on my season recaps. I do believe he is capable of a bounce back if, he could get the puck on net a little more frequently. Looking at his career numbers, his shooting percentage is historically good. So I do think he has more than what we've seen. I think there's more to Colin Blackwell than what he's shown us this far, but make no mistake about it. He underwhelmed in his first season with the Blackhawks, and for that reason, I'm giving him a D+, and it seemed like everyone, for the most part, was on the same page here. Funny enough, the majority vote on YouTube and Twitter was both a C, and both of them ended up at 64%. 64% of the YouTube voters said C, 64% of the Twitter voters said C. The difference was there was a tie on YouTube for second. 17% of the voters voted for a D/F, while another 17 also voted for a B, which had me a little surprised. I didn't think anyone was going to give Colin Blackwell that high of a grade, whereas on Twitter, the second majority vote was 27% for D/F. That's honestly where I expected most of the votes to come in at. So feels like we were all on the same page here. We were all a little disappointed with Colin Blackwell's output this year. We'll see if he can bounce back next year, as I'd assume he's going to be part of the Chicago Blackhawks, although we could see him involved in a trade because of that contract this summer. Wouldn't be the craziest thing, but if he does come back, hopefully he picks it up a little bit so we could flip him at the deadline for something of note. All right, I think that is going to wrap up Friday, June 9th. Nice episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show, and be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, and you can get the latest episode as soon as it's available each and every day. Once again, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Find me out on Twitter at JackBushman2. And also be sure to go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until the next episode, everyone, enjoy your weekend. It's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.